He was only 21 when it all ended in a flash of twisted metal and silence. Rock and roll pioneer Eddie Cochran died tragically young, and what he left behind tells a haunting story. From his abandoned home frozen in time to the partner he never got to marry, and the shockingly small net worth that followed his chart-topping fame, this is the forgotten legacy of a legend gone too soon. Let's uncover the pieces he never got to finish. On the night of April 16, 1960, tragedy struck the world of rock and roll when rising American star Eddie Cochran was fatally injured in a car crash while touring the United Kingdom. He had just finished performing his final show of the tour at the Bristol Hippodrome, sharing the stage with fellow rock and roll icon Gene Vincent. The tour had been a major success, thrilling British audiences and helping to solidify the popularity of American rock music across the Atlantic. Following the concert, Cochran, Vincent, and others began the journey back to London. Their destination was Heathrow Airport, where they were scheduled to catch a flight home to the United States. To make the overnight trip, they hired a taxi, a cream-colored 1960 Ford Consul Mark II saloon, driven by George Martin, a 19-year-old driver who bore no relation to the famed Beatles producer of the same name. In the car were 5 people: Eddie Cochran, Gene Vincent, Sharon Sheeley, Cochran's girlfriend and a successful songwriter, Patrick Tompkins, their 29-year-old tour manager, and Martin. At approximately 11:50 p.m., while traveling along the Bath Road through the town of Chippenham, the car veered out of control at Roden Hill. The weather had been clear, and the road was dry. However, the vehicle was later determined to have been traveling at an excessive speed. Without any involvement from another vehicle, the Ford Consul crashed into a concrete lamppost. The impact was severe. Seated in the center of the back seat, Eddie Cochran instinctively threw himself over Sharon Sheeley in an attempt to protect her. His selfless act likely saved her life, but tragically, the collision forced the left rear passenger door open and Cochran was ejected from the car. He sustained a massive traumatic brain injury, most likely caused by blunt force trauma to the skull. Emergency services quickly transported all of the injured passengers to Chippenham Community Hospital before they were transferred to St. Martin's Hospital in Bath. Though efforts were made to save him, Cochran never regained consciousness. At 4:10 p.m. the following day, Easter Sunday, April 17th, Eddie Cochran was pronounced dead. He was just 21 years old. The accident left a trail of injuries. Sheeley suffered injuries to her back and thigh. Gene Vincent endured a fractured collarbone and serious injuries to both legs, injuries that would plague him for the rest of his life. Tompkins suffered facial injuries and a suspected skull fracture. The driver, George Martin, emerged with no serious injuries. In the aftermath, Sheeley and Vincent returned to the United States, shaken and forever changed. Cochran's body was also flown home, and on April 25, 1960, he was laid to rest at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Cypress, California, following a private funeral. In a haunting postscript to the tragedy, Sharon Sheeley later revealed in an interview with Photoplay magazine that Cochran had expressed an eerie premonition just hours before the crash. As they prepared to leave for the airport, he reportedly turned to her and said, "You know, Sherry, I've got a queer feeling that fate's not going to let us be together. Something awful is going to happen. I can feel it." In the aftermath of the tragic car accident that claimed the life of Eddie Cochran on the night of April 16, 1960, legal proceedings were brought against the vehicle's driver, George Martin, then just 19 years old. Despite favorable weather conditions and dry roads, it was determined that Martin had been driving at an excessive speed, which led to the loss of control and eventual crash into a concrete lamppost at Roden Hill, Chippenham. No other vehicle was involved in the collision. Martin was subsequently convicted of dangerous driving, a serious charge considering the loss of life and extent of the injuries sustained by the passengers. He was fined £50, a considerable sum at the time, with the penalty including a default clause of 6 months' imprisonment if he failed to pay. Additionally, he was disqualified from driving for 15 years, effectively removing his legal right to operate a vehicle for a significant portion of his adult life. However, this disqualification did not remain in effect for the full term. On May 7, 1968, just 8 years after the accident, the ban was lifted by a judge at the Bristol Assizes. The decision was made after the court considered that Martin had endured considerable financial hardship during the years following the crash. Though the exact nature of these hardships was not detailed in public records, it was understood that the consequences of the accident, both personal and financial, had deeply affected him. Meanwhile, items from the crash, including the wrecked Ford Consul and Eddie Cochran's personal belongings, were impounded at the local police station in Chippenham. Among these belongings was Cochran's cherished Gretsch 6120 guitar, a signature orange model closely associated with his sound. At the time, a young David Harmon, then a police cadet stationed there, reportedly took the opportunity to play Cochran's guitar. Harmon would later rise to fame in the music world as Dave D., frontman of the popular 1960s band Dave D., Dozy, Beaky, Mick, and Titch. The moment marked a curious intersection of past and future in British rock history, one star gone too soon and another yet to emerge. As the years passed, Cochran's legacy remained strong, particularly in the town of Chippenham, where the crash occurred. A plaque was erected on Roden Hill, marking the exact spot where the fatal accident happened, serving as both a tribute and a cautionary reminder of the dangers of reckless driving. Another significant memorial was placed on the grounds of St. Martin's Hospital in Bath, where Cochran had been taken following the crash and later died. The memorial stone stands in the old chapel grounds of the hospital. On the 50th anniversary of his death in 2010, the stone was carefully restored and a plaque was added beside a nearby sundial to honor Cochran's memory. In 2018, further efforts were made to preserve his legacy. The Eddie Cochran Memorial Project launched a fundraising campaign to restore the memorial plaque at the crash site and to install a new base feature titled 3 Steps to Heaven, named after Cochran's posthumously released single. The installation was designed not only as a physical tribute, but also as a symbolic representation of Cochran's brief life, remarkable talent, and enduring influence on generations of rock and roll musicians. A lesser-known detail of the night of the crash also came to light over time. Tony Sheridan, a young musician who would later collaborate with the Beatles in their early Hamburg days, had reportedly asked to share the taxi ride with Cochran and Vincent. However, both artists politely declined his request, either due to space or plans already set. That simple turn of fate spared Sheridan from the deadly accident, adding a chilling "what if" to the night's tragic events. Besides Eddie Cochran's death, are you curious about his personal life? Eddie Cochran's romantic relationship with Sharon Sheeley was as passionate and dynamic as the music that brought them together. Sheeley was not just a beautiful face in the crowd, she was a rising talent in her own right, a gifted singer-songwriter with a sharp sense for pop hits and a deep understanding of the music industry. She had worked under the guidance of manager Jerry Capehart, who also managed Cochran, which allowed her to immerse herself in the world of rock and roll from an early age. Before the two became a couple, Sheeley harbored a strong, though seemingly unrequited admiration for Cochran. She had been infatuated with him for nearly 2 years, watching his rise to fame with the same mixture of awe and longing shared by many young women of that era. Determined to catch his eye, Sheeley took bold steps. Originally a brunette, she dyed her hair blonde, reinventing her image to stand out in the crowd. She also invested in a new wardrobe, all in a bid to appeal to the charismatic and rebellious heartthrob. Her chance finally came at the end of 1958, when she attended a New Year's Eve party hosted by Cochran in New York City. That night, her efforts paid off. Whether it was the new look, the charm she exuded, or simply the timing, Cochran began to see her in a new light. From that evening on, their relationship blossomed into something serious, built not only on mutual attraction but also a shared love of music. Professionally, Sheely contributed directly to Cochran's career. She wrote several songs for him, including Love Again and Cherished Memories, showcasing both her lyrical sensitivity and her understanding of Cochran's emotional and musical range. Perhaps most notably, she co-wrote the 1959 hit Something Else, a raw, energetic anthem that has since become one of Cochran's most iconic tracks. She penned the song alongside Bill Cochran, Eddie's brother, further demonstrating how closely entwined she had become with Eddie's life, personally and professionally. By 1960, the pair had become secretly engaged, with plans to build a future together. Their bond had deepened beyond the excitement of a whirlwind romance. It had matured into something rooted in shared dreams and a desire to build a lasting partnership. Yet, due to the pressures of fame and the scrutiny of the public eye, they kept their engagement private. Their love story remained largely in the background until decades later, when it resurfaced in popular culture. In 1988, Levi Strauss & Company released a television commercial as part of its Levi's 501 campaign, which was centered around the theme of youthful rebellion and classic Americana. Titled simply Eddie Cochran, the ad was directed by Sid McCartney and offered a stylized, dramatized account of how Sheely supposedly first caught Cochran's attention at the 1958 New Year's Eve party, all thanks to her wearing a pair of Levi's jeans. In the commercial, Sheely was portrayed by actress Sharon Devlin, and the ad was presented as being narrated by Sheely herself, adding a personal and nostalgic layer to the storytelling. The soundtrack for the commercial featured Cochran's enduring hit, Come On Everybody, a high-energy rock and roll number that perfectly captured the era's spirit and Cochran's style. The song was re-released as a promotional single, and the campaign was followed by a compilation album of Cochran's greatest hits, reintroducing his music to a new generation of fans. Now it's time for us to tour Eddie Cochran's homes. During Eddie's childhood, the Cochran family relocated several times, a reflection of the economic pressures and changing job opportunities of the post-Depression and wartime years. After spending a few formative years in Minnesota, the family first moved to Oklahoma City. There, Eddie's exposure to American country and Western music deepened. The rhythms of the South, mixed with Western swing and the growing influence of honky-tonk, were ever present in Oklahoma during the 1940s. These sounds would later influence Eddie's fusion of styles, giving his music a unique voice that set him apart from many of his contemporaries. Eventually, the family settled permanently in California, where Eddie would spend his teenage years and where his musical identity would truly take shape. The move to Bell Gardens, a suburb in southeast Los Angeles County, proved pivotal. California in the 1950s was a hotbed of musical innovation, a melting pot of cultures and styles. Young Eddie quickly became immersed in the dynamic music scene, absorbing influences from jazz, blues, country, rhythm and blues, and the emerging genre of rock and roll. Eddie showed an early interest in music and learned to play a variety of instruments, but it was the guitar that captivated him most. By the time he was in high school, he was already recognized as an exceptional musician. He was particularly inspired by artists like Chet Atkins and Les Paul, not only for their musical talent, but for their pioneering work in multi-track recording and guitar techniques, both of which Cochran would later experiment with himself. He formed a band with two school friends, and the trio began performing locally. Though still a teenager, Eddie's confidence on stage and his technical skill on the guitar quickly earned him a reputation. Around this time, he began recording demos and working as a studio musician, backing up other performers and honing his skills in professional environments. This period of intense learning helped Eddie develop not only as a performer, but also as a producer and arranger, giving him an unusually mature understanding of how to build a song from the ground up. His breakthrough came when he partnered with songwriter and manager Jerry Capehart, who recognized Eddie's star potential. Together they wrote and recorded a string of songs that captured the restless energy of youth, blending Eddie's musical versatility with Capehart's understanding of the emerging teen market. One of their first big successes was "Sittin' in the Balcony" in 1957, which made its way onto the Billboard charts and introduced Eddie to a national audience. The Cochran family's move from the Midwest to the musical heartland of California had positioned Eddie at the forefront of a cultural revolution. He became a symbol of the new American teenager, cool, rebellious, and bursting with electric energy. In just a few short years, Eddie Cochran would leave an indelible mark on music history, helping to define rock and roll in its earliest and most exhilarating form. In 1952, when Eddie Cochran was just 13 years old, the Cochran family settled into what would become their most permanent and formative residence, Bell Gardens, a modest working-class suburb of Los Angeles County, California. The family took up residence on Gage Street, a quiet neighborhood lined with small single-story homes and close-knit families. Though unassuming in appearance, this corner of Bell Gardens would become the epicenter of Eddie's transformation from a curious boy with a guitar into one of the earliest pioneers of rock and roll. The post-war boom had turned Southern California into a thriving cultural melting pot, and for a teenager like Eddie, it offered the perfect environment to explore music. With Hollywood just a short drive away and the explosion of American youth culture beginning to stir, the 1950s in Bell Gardens was a time of jukeboxes, hot rods, and high school dances, an ideal backdrop for a young artist with ambition and raw talent. At home on Gage Street, Eddie practiced guitar relentlessly, often locking himself away in his bedroom to master the instrument. He had begun showing interest in music years earlier, experimenting with the drums, ukulele, and piano, but it was the guitar that truly captivated him. Inspired by country music stars such as Hank Williams and technical wizards like Chet Atkins, Eddie developed his own playing style, one that blended country picking, blues phrasing, and rockabilly swagger. It was during these hours of practice in the family living room and garage that he began to build the foundation of the signature sound that would later electrify audiences around the world. Eddie wasn't content with just playing alone. As early as junior high school, he began forming bands with classmates and neighborhood friends. These were often informal groups, playing at local parties, youth centers, and school events, but they gave Eddie invaluable experience with live performance and musical collaboration. He quickly became known among his peers not only for his skill, but for his confidence and charisma on stage, a born performer even before he had a record deal. One of his earliest bands was called the Cochran Brothers, which, despite the name, included Eddie and a friend, Hank Cochran, who wasn't related but shared the same surname. The duo focused on country and western tunes, performing locally and even securing some small-time gigs across California. Their harmonies and clean-cut style fit the popular tastes of the time, but Eddie's personal interests were beginning to shift. He was drawn to the emerging rhythm and blues sound, and more importantly, to the rebellious energy that was bubbling up in early rock and roll. Bell Gardens was close enough to Los Angeles that Eddie could immerse himself in the vibrant Southern California music scene. He frequented record shops, listened to late-night radio broadcasts, and attended local concerts whenever possible. He absorbed everything: guitar riffs, vocal styles, recording techniques, filing them away as inspiration for his own musical evolution. By the time Eddie entered high school, his talent had become undeniable. He started recording demo tapes, writing original material, and experimenting with multi-track recording, something that was quite advanced for a teenager in the early 1950s. His knowledge of sound equipment and studio processes would later earn him a reputation not only as a performer, but as a visionary producer and arranger. By 1959, as Eddie Cochran's star was rapidly rising, he and his family relocated from Bell Gardens to a new suburban home on Bernice Circle in Buena Park, California. Nestled in northern Orange County, Buena Park was a growing community during the post-war boom, an area of new housing developments, wide streets, and a wholesome suburban atmosphere. For the Cochran family, the move to Bernice Circle marked not just a change in address, but a symbolic step into a more settled and comfortable life, one that reflected Eddie's growing success as a recording artist and performer. The home on Bernice Circle became Eddie's final family residence, and it was there that he would spend the last full year of his life. Though his schedule was increasingly consumed by tours, recording sessions, and public appearances, whenever he returned home, Bernice Circle offered him a quiet place to regroup, write music, and spend time with his family, particularly his supportive parents, Frank and Alice Cochran. It was a modest yet comfortable home, surrounded by manicured lawns and friendly neighbors, a place where Eddie could escape the noise of the industry and relax in familiar surroundings. By this point, Eddie was no longer just a promising local talent. With hits like Summertime Blues, 1958, Come On Everybody, and Something Else, he had become a full-fledged rock and roll star. He was regularly featured on television, appeared in the film